Hi, I'm Ariadne Vromen. I'm the Bunting Chair of Public Administration in the Crawford School of Public Policy at ANU. I've been researching and thinking about how people engage with politics for a long time. What I'm particularly interested in is how we can include a broader range of voices in participatory politics and informal politics more broadly. I've been particularly interested in how young people engage with politics to try and create social and political change. So what we know from existing research is that young people are engaged in politics more broadly. They might talk with their friends on social media, they might sign a petition, they might donate money to a cause that matters to them, they might choose to buy or not buy products based on an ethical, social or environmental consideration. So broadly speaking, young people, like most older people, are engaged in the political issues that matter to them. What we see is that there is a disjuncture between how people might engage in politics in their everyday lives and the formal political institutions. Research continues to show that a lot of people don't trust formal politics because they don't feel like they're heard or listened to. They don't feel like their voices matter for creating change beyond those regular incidences of an election. In thinking about whether or not young people are included or excluded from formal politics, we also need to think about how young people are engaged in politics currently. So arguably, the problem here is not that young people aren't engaged. We know that they care deeply about issues, that they talk about politics with their friends and social networks more broadly. They are expressing themselves on the issues that matter to them. But what they do feel is that they are excluded from consideration by more formal or institutionalised politics, that their voice is not recognised and the issues that matter to them are not being taken up in formal political debate. So we need to kind of think about how we might include young people more in the decision-making that matters over their lives. Part of that is understanding the issues that matter to them, and not just the issues that matter to them, but their experiences that are shaping why those issues matter. What we could think about is that there are probably a group of 5 or 6 core issues that consistently matter to young people that are probably not being taken up in broader political debate, that their voices are being excluded from that formal institutionalised decision-making. We could think about education being a space that matters to young people, both access to education, be it either further formal education through university or through vocational education to go into trades and apprenticeships. All of these things are becoming increasingly expensive for contemporary young people, and that's a concern about the choices that young people can make to furthering their lives and developing their life course over time. Related to that is the issue of employment. Young people are worried about secure jobs. We know that the majority of young people are concentrated in more precarious work. They work casually or they work part-time. So these issues of job security and access to employment support and developing of careers over time or jobs over time are really important to young people. And we can see that even in the debates around access to both job seeker and job keeper during the pandemic in Australia over the last 18 months. A third issue that's of concern to young people is also housing affordability into the future, both rental security, but also being able to afford to buy a house. We know from research that young people are much less likely to be able to afford a house in comparison to the generations before. But this is a broader issue about the costs of living in general. The costs of living for this generation of young people are substantially more than they were for previous generations. There's economic evidence to suggest that young people are actually going backwards in comparison to their parents, as such other things of starting a family, childcare and so on are increasingly costly. So these issues matter to young people, and young people's experiences are quite fundamentally different from older generations in these cost of living kind of domains. Young people are also interested broadly in fairness and equity in society. We see young people often at the promoting issues around equity and fairness, be it against in campaigns against racism, against sexism, the rights of people with disabilities and the rights of people to live their lives in the ways that they choose. Again, young people tend to fundamentally think differently about this topic. And so they are sort of interested in creating a more equal society. And then a fifth issue where young people's interests, and we've seen this around the world, but also in Australia, is their concerns about climate change and the damage that's being done to the planet by climate change, and what are the kinds of range or best kinds of responses that can be made by political decision makers to those concerns of young people. So all of these issues together are all important to making the good society, but young people tend to have different experiences and different attitudes and different understandings to previous generations of access to equity and also more broadly to those issues of social and political change. So overall, it's kind of quite straightforward to be able to identify the kinds of issues that young people are concerned about and to be able to see that their views, their experiences, their concerns are being excluded from broader political debate. But we're at an important juncture now in Australian democracy where we can think more deliberately about how do we include young people's voices? How do we make sure that their concerns are being heard by the people with most power in Australian society and by politicians, by parties, by policymakers more broadly? So we could group the kinds of mechanisms that could be adopted into 4 main ways that could better include young people. All of these mechanisms have different emphases in the way that they would change the nature of inclusion of young people's voices, and they're all important options or possibilities to think about for better including young people. So the first kind of reform that we could think about is one that focuses on funding youth advocacy organisations and possibly funding a youth peak organisation that represents the services and advocacy organisations that already work with young people on the ground. So this would be the kinds of organisations that are working around rental affordability, around access to work and education, the climate change organisations. So traditionally in Australian politics, there's been a tendency to fund peak organisations who collect the views of other organisations and civil society groups and bring them together to government. That's one kind of way of better including young people's views and attitudes and experiences is through a peak advocacy organisation. The second way we could think about better including young people's views within decision making is to consult young people directly. So this could be in going to young people, doing work such as a regular survey to see what are their views and what are their attitudes and what are their experiences, and formalising that kind of survey work directly with young people themselves through some kind of formal structure such as a parliamentary body or a policy body such as an Office of Youth. The third way that we could think about including young people's views more broadly in policy making, politics and decision making would be lowering the voting age. So at the moment we have compulsory voting in Australia, and once you turn 18, it's compulsory to register to vote in elections. Other countries have experimented with lowering the voting age, arguing that if you lower the voting age, then you're more likely to get young people's views, particularly the views of 16 and 17-year-olds, also included in broader debate. So countries like Brazil and Austria and Scotland have all now lowered their voting age to 16 to be able to enable the younger age groups to express themselves through voting. So the fourth way that we might think about how do we include young people's voices and attitudes and experiences more in politics and decision making would be to encourage young people to join existing formal political institutions. We could encourage young people to join parties or to join other groups that represent them, and to be able to try and change those organisations, particularly political parties from within, by being active members with those organisations. So we can see that these 4 different ways of thinking about inclusion of young people's voices have different emphases in the way that they collect and bring together young people's views and attitudes and experiences. They're all interesting and good ways. I wouldn't suggest that one is better than the other. We can all have a bit more of a think about why we might think that some of these approaches might be better than other approaches to really enable the inclusion of young people's views, attitudes, and experiences in democratic politics today. When we think about all the kinds of reforms we could make to existing practice to better include young people in the decisions that matter to their lives, what's really important is that we listen to young people, that we hear their voices and we hear their concerns. Innovations like this Connected to Parliament project, which takes a local member of Parliament and brings people to them, to engage with them, to ask that member of Parliament to listen to people's ranges of views and concerns and what kind of things that they might want to suggest need to be reformed, is a really important fundamental first step. It shows that democracy is responsive and that there is a connection that we can foster and facilitate more between members of Parliament and those people that they're representing. So I'm really enthusiastic about this opportunity as a way that we can expand the voices that are currently heard in politics and decision making in Australia.